Hello, welcome back to my channel. So, I recently did a video about something that I call chronic illness narcissism, and this video sort of kind of piggybacks on that. And I recently saw, again, on Twitter, as usual, somebody tweeted out, it was something to the effect of, why do you always talk about your illness? And then the girl said, well, that's because that's a big part of my life. And I think a lot of us at some point or another have been told this or asked this question by someone that, why do we always talk about our illness? Don't we have something else to talk about? And so on and so forth. And I I think we all do go through this phase, especially when we're newly diagnosed or when we're just starting to try to figure out what's going on with us, especially those of us who have illnesses that went undiagnosed for many, many years. We do become very obsessed with our condition. And so it's all that we can talk about, it's all that's on our mind. And it people tend to pick up on that because obviously if they're having conversations with us, we have nothing else to talk about except that. But I do think that this is unhealthy. I see it a lot. Like I said, I see it a lot on Twitter. I've in my personal life when I've befriended a few chronically ill people in person, and those friendships tend not to last very long because they are just centered around illness. And I think that's the reason why a lot of chronically ill people tend to gravitate towards, support groups and other people who are sick because they feel that, well, here's someone that I can just really go at it with over my illness. And not all of us are like this. There are many of us who don't really talk about it much. Um, but it is a phase that we all go through. I think the problem arises when we get stuck in that phase. And I do think that there are people that get stuck there and that just never leave that phase. And one thing that I've seen is that these people tend to call themselves chronic illness advocates. And while they can be very helpful and they can raise awareness, I do see that there is sort of a difference between an advocate and someone who just can't stop talking about their medical condition. I think advocates take more of an active approach. I think they're involved in organizations and involved in, you know, in actually advocating and raising awareness, not just talking about it nonstop on social media or with friends and family. They're actually doing stuff in organizations that are related to their illnesses. For example, I follow a lady that has lupus, and she seems to be very active in the lupus community. She participates in lupus events. She's always retweeting different events for the lupus community. So I do notice a bit of a difference, and she's not always kind of talking about her illness. She has other interests, and the one thing about people who are chronic illness obsessed is that they have no other interest. This is literally the center of their universe. They have blogs that are just fully dedicated to their illness. All of their tweets on Twitter, their entire account is dedicated to their illness. It's just 100% their illness all the time. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I have a channel that is um, focused on chronic illness. And part of the reason why I created this channel was because I wanted a space where I could kind of talk about chronic illness in general, because I don't talk about it at all with anybody in my life. I'm actually kind of not, I don't want to say not allowed to, but it's just not a topic of discussion that is acceptable in, in my house and among my family. And I've kind of gotten used to that, and I kind of don't really care to talk about it very much. I really don't even talk about my own personal illness on this channel. I sort of talk about chronic illness more broadly. Um, but I kind of have this space for that. And I do understand that there are people that use Twitter and Instagram and all of that just for, they're discussing their medical condition or venting. But I do think there are certain signs that can indicate that you're very obsessed with your chronic illness and that you're not, that's just all that your life is. Um, So a few of those things are, I mean, obviously number one, which is the same thing I spoke about in my last video, was it alienates. I have a very difficult time saying that word. It alienates your friends and family. So if your friends have basically dropped off, you don't see them or talk to them that much anymore, your family doesn't like to discuss things with you, or they don't really even like to talk to you very much anymore, you could be chronic illness obsessed. I met a gentleman several years ago through a Lyme disease support group. It always happens at the Lyme disease support group. I have many stories from this support group. I've only been there twice, and it was a difference of a year. And the second time I went, I met this gentleman, and he befriended me very, very quickly and started talking to me. And it turned out that we had the same doctor, or he had been with my doctor. So it was like, oh, that's cool. Like we had different experiences, but we were venting and all of that. And so it was kind of nice to meet someone that had gone through the same thing I had gone through. And so he wanted to meet again. And he actually drove all the way. I mean, it was a bit of a drive, but he drove out to see me. And we met up at a park. And he had this huge, like, binder. And I took my medical stuff too, but I didn't really expect, I thought that it was just going to be kind of more loose conversation about our medical stuff and maybe our doctor that we had. But it was literally like he just opened up the binder and was just like, this is my blood work, this is my stuff, and just analyzing every little thing. And I quickly learned that, and he also told me a story that his family no longer really talked to him very much. When he would go visit them, they just, kind of would even tell him, like, we don't want to hear anything that has to do with illness. Like, we're not, like, that's not a topic of discussion anymore. So he was looking for someone to sort of obsess with, which is even more unhealthy than obsessing by yourself, to be honest. But this endless research, if you're researching nonstop, if this is what occupies your mind, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram, if you're all over the internet looking for information, digging around, and like I said, we all go through this phase, especially when we're undiagnosed. But if you can't seem to get out of that, then that is a problem. Like anything else, like any other kind of addiction, that does become a problem over time. And I did go through that phase in the very beginning, especially even after I got diagnosed. I was just looking up everything I possibly could about the illness on the internet and looking up any information. And it can be a very dangerous game to play. There's a lot of good information out there, but there's a lot of nonsense, especially right now. Especially right now. I was diagnosed probably over a decade ago. I would say things are even worse now. Twitter was, I think, new around the time that I got diagnosed. It was only a few years old. Now we have all the social media platforms and tons of misinformation. So it's a much more dangerous game now than it was back then. Ruminating over your illness, just kind of going over it in your head over and over again. Like I said, it's your only topic of conversation. It's the only thing you're on the internet doing. It's the only thing that you're tweeting about. It's the only thing you're posting about on Facebook. I post every now and again. It's very rare that I post an article that I found online about, my illness or my condition. I never post personal stuff. I'll never post like, oh, I'm having such a bad flare today. I try to kind of stay away from that because the attention can get addicting, especially if you get people saying, oh, are you okay? Blah, blah, blah. And there are people that are going to give you really negative attention as well. So I think both ends of that spectrum can be really unhealthy. And I just don't want to start that. It's almost like, if you're a recovering alcoholic, it's like, well, I can just have one drink. Well, no, you can't. You're a recovering alcoholic. It's better if you just don't drink at all. So it can be a very, very dangerous game to play. My opinion for this, my opinion about all of this is that it is, I don't want to say it's normal. It is expected. And I think the reason why there are so many people that become very obsessed with their illness and the gentleman that I met was not the only one. I've spoken to another person through, I believe through Twitter, who was the same way, just absolutely obsessed with his condition and started diagnosing himself with everything else that he could find. A lot of people at support groups are like this. They self-diagnose, they self-treat. If you're self-treating, that's also probably another red flag. I've met people that will say that they have the certain illnesses when they've never been diagnosed by an actual MD, and they just say, "Okay, I have this," and then they're just, going from doctor to doctor to doctor. Um, I've also met a certain type of person that even once they're offered treatment, they're diagnosed and they're offered treatment, they refuse treatment, which is very weird to me, but I think that's also part of this obsession with being sick. Well, not with being sick, it's an obsession with an illness, that it clouds your judgment and you're not um, even taking the treatment that you need to get better. And I have seen that as well, which is really scary. Um, I do think it's a trauma response. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a, this is just speaking from my own personal experience and my observations with other people like this. I think it's a trauma response. You're in a lot of pain. You're very sick. You're not feeling well. Your judgment is definitely messed up. And I absolutely 100% believe that every person with chronic illness suffers from poor judgment, which makes us ideal targets for quacks and, misinformation. We have bad judgment, and I think I might even make a video solely on that, because I think it's a really, really big thing that we need to talk about. But it is trauma. We are going through a major trauma. We're losing our lives. We're still alive, but we have lost a lot of our life to our illnesses, and we're mourning. And a lot of times when people mourn, they just, they become obsessive, they become angry, which is another thing that I have seen with a lot of sick people. um you know it really, it is not help. Like, you have to deal with it. You have to learn to deal with this trauma response, which is why I have said before in my previous videos, even if you're chronically ill, even if it's not in your head, even if you have a diagnosis, you still need to see a therapist. Hands down, you need to have a therapist in your corner, because you're not going to deal well with this. um so, and again, to elaborate on that, it's poor coping skills. We're not coping with our illness well. And when I see people that say that they're advocates, that they're this and that, I think to myself, are you coping well? Are you talking to a therapist? Or have you learned any coping skills besides nonstop tweeting or talking about your illness? And so, a very, very good book, or books, and I have done reviews on them. You'll find them somewhere on my channel. I honestly, my channel is kind of a mess. The How to Be Sick series by Toni Bernard. If you have not checked out those books, I highly, highly recommend it. And she addresses this very thing. She talks about how she went through this phase, I believe, prior to, I mean, she's diagnosed, but kind of doesn't really know how she got sick. And she said that she endlessly, endlessly talked about her illness in the beginning, and she just, to the point where her family was just like, we just don't want to talk to you anymore. Like, this is just getting to be too much. And she did come to terms with that. And she started to incorporate her Buddhist practices, because she was, I think, Buddhist prior to her illness. And she said, why did all of these things that I had learned prior to my illness suddenly go out the window once I was sick? And so she started incorporating that into her, her daily practice, while she was sick. And that's how the How to Be Sick series came about. If you have not read those books and you are in desperate need of some coping skills, I highly recommend How to Be Sick by Toni Bernard. And then there's another one, I think, called How to Live Well with Chronic Pain and Illness, also by her. She has 3 books, but I think 2 are more specific to chronic illness. And I read her books and I have incorporated some of those things, even though I had already been practicing some of those things um, prior to uh, my diagnosis, and it did help to have those things already kind of in my arsenal of coping skills. But if you really need something easy to understand, her books are really, really good, and I mean, she even gives you certain little exercises to do. It's just really great, and I highly recommend it. The last thing you want to do is alienate the little bit of acquaintances and family that you have left, because our illnesses do um, inadvertently drive those people away. And I also, like I said, I just think it's unhealthy. I think it's unhealthy to just, we are more than just our illness. We have other things. Even though it's taken a lot of those things away from us, we still have other things. If you were an artist before, or if you liked movies, or, if you did some, I don't know, crafts or whatever, you still have those things. And I do believe that, yes, take a break from it in the beginning. In the beginning, we are overwhelmed, we don't know what to do with ourselves, and so we stop. There's times when I can't even read a book because my mind is just so messed up. But eventually I do come back to it, and I try to get back into it, because my life is so many other things besides just this illness. And it's very important for us to remember that. And also to remember the people around us. Being sick is not a license to be, and I'm pretty sure, I think I did a video on this as well. It's not a license to be a horrible person to other people. It's not a license to neglect other people. It's not a license to ignore other people's suffering either. There are still other people that are suffering a lot. Um, and we have to remember our humanity, and not forget that our world is not the only world that exists. Even though it feels like that sometimes, especially when we're really sick, it's like I can't, I can't think about anybody else but myself in this moment. And that's okay. It's okay for us to have those days when it's just about us. But when we feel a little bit better, we should be able to get out of that space, and get back into the real world. So that's a topic I have for you today. If you have any comments, go ahead and leave them down below. I'm interested to hear if you guys agree with me, or if you guys are offended by this. I know that there are probably going to be some people that are offended by it. Um, but this is not meant to offend. I actually just want people to not be in that space, because I do think that it's unhealthy. Anything that you obsess over is unhealthy. Anything that becomes an addiction is unhealthy. So I'm hoping that this will help somebody who's stuck in that spot and really wants to get out of it, because there are people that want to get out of it. I think there are people that don't like feeling stuck and basically spinning their wheels over their illness, but they don't know how to get out of that. And I was one of those people that I was just like, I just don't want to be in this spot anymore. I want to get out of this, at least for a little while, because I mean, eventually we go back to it. It's part of the chronic illness cycle. We will go back to it. We will ruminate over it. We will obsess over it, during our flares. And then once we feel a little bit better, we need to try to pull ourselves out of it a little bit. But that's what I have for you guys today. I will try to come out with some more videos if I can. I'm doing the best that I can given my current situation. But stay tuned. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. That way you get alerts. I don't post all the time, so when I do post, the alerts will come in handy. So you're not going to be getting alerts like every day, but it'll come in handy when I do post and when something is uploaded. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you guys again soon.